Okay. So I want to get into sleep deprivation. So I know this is a topic near and dear to your heart, and this is a topic that's also near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, well, it's such an important conversation in the fire service. There's kind of two channels to look at it. So first, you have performance. If you do any sort of behind the scenes, documentary or research on elite athletes, your favorite athletes, if we're talking about NFL, NBA, these people that are consistently paid, maybe not so much the UFC because, you lose 3 fights in a row, you're discarded. So, I wouldn't say that was the same kind of sport to look at, but they have experts from all these things, and sleep is imperative. And I've had so many people from strength and conditioning that have worked with some of the most elite teams and won the championships, and a lot of them say, look, we talk about diet, we talk about exercise, they're like, if you're not sleeping, those two pillars are almost pointless. So if we're talking about performance, I'll sleep when I'm dead and all that macho bullshit is just
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of opting to be a worse version of yourself from a performance standpoint. Now, if we're getting kind of more so into my community now, you're so far from performance that you're actually operating at a detriment. So Green Beret selection, they're deliberately sleep depriving the
Mm-hmm.
buds and the SEALs. They're deliberately sleep depriving to weed people out. Interrogation techniques, you're deliberately sleep depriving. You have a firefighter that's worked 72-hour shifts, so 3 days without sleep, or very, very poor quality sleep if they have. Now you're asking them to drive that fire engine, lights and sirens, amongst traffic where your wife and kids are on their way home or crossing that intersection. I mean, how many times have we seen emergency vehicles kill people at an intersection? Were they just saying, I don't care about red lights? Or did they have a micro sleep, not even realize it was a red light because they blanked out for a few seconds and now they're upside down wondering what just happened? So, the performance side, I mean, again, law enforcement, the teenager that reaches for his license and the sleep deprived policeman shoots him, we never hear that conversation, do we? Those gray area shootings, not the ones that they were completely wrong, not the ones where it was a justified shoot, but that gray area. How much does sleep deprivation factor into that young person now being dead? So the performance and the danger of the lack of performance is one conversation in itself. The other side, though, is the chronic disease, and that's mental health and physical health. And I've always said firefighters don't die of one thing, we die of everything. Whatever the weakest link in the chain, we're going to die from. And so, you look at our cancers, it's all the cancers that we get. I mean, there's some that are a little bit more kind of, male or female dominated, but it's not one thing. It's not, oh, it's always lung cancer because we breathe in, the smoke. It's I compare the conversation with cancer in the fire service and also mental health in the fire service. The mental health, like, oh well, James, you were at 9/11 or you were at the Vegas shooting. To me, that's like looking at COVID-19. That was a virus, so that could be your carcinogen from a fire. It can be that acute trauma you had in Afghanistan or whatever it is. But the other side of the conversation is the resilience of the human being. If you're resilient, that cancer won't be able to initiate. You'll absorb that carcinogen and you'll get rid of it, hopefully. You'll be able to process that trauma, and because of coping mechanisms, it'll become a long-term memory. But through sleep deprivation, we're destroying that resilience. We're destroying the ability. We literally, can't process trauma if we're not sleeping. The brain literally takes a bath, for lack of a better description, when we
Mm-hmm.
sleep, and it processes those thoughts. You think about musculoskeletal injuries. When you're into exercise, you understand that whether it's learning a skill or we're breaking down the muscle through weight training, it's when we sleep that we heal, that we rebuild, we process that skill. So if you're not sleeping, you're more likely to get knees, shoulders, back, the injuries there. The immune system, the people that we sent out with no PPE when COVID first hit were arguably some of the most immune compromised people we have: doctors, nurses, firefighters, EMS. Now, fast forward a year later, all of a sudden everyone calls them murderers because they wouldn't take a vaccine, but that's another entire conversation. And then cancer as well. So you've got all these things, and then you look at the hormonal disruption, and you look at my community. Young, fit firefighters are barely 30 years old with testosterone of 250, 200. And now we're wondering about the fertility problems. I just had an expert the other day saying that we have a much higher incidence of issues with our children's health. So there's a reproductive side. And then you've got weight gain, which then leads to the diabetes and the heart disease. So sleep is everything. It's everything, which is why if you didn't have electric lights, you wouldn't have a choice. Soon after the sun set, if you lived in a house with no power, you would fall asleep because that's what we're supposed to do. But because of this artificial world that we've created, we're able to stay up. But in my community, what we haven't balanced with, we'll be awake for 24 hours or ready for 24 hours. You guys go to sleep. We got this. Go rest. We haven't balanced that with, well, in return, we'll give you enough time to rest and recover. So in my community, what I'm seeing is, as I said before, they're dying of everything.
So speaking about trauma, I'm a trauma therapist, and, like you said, sleep helps you process the day's information. And you just had this guest on, and she spoke about it very well, Dr. Sarah Jenke. She talked about how it's likely that trauma is further being embedded as a result of poor sleep. So you're not being able to process that trauma throughout the evening in a way so that you're more resilient when you wake up. And I've worked with firemen and paramedics and combat veterans and the whole smorgasbord of trauma and service members. But yeah, like within all that, there's a common thread of poor sleep. And then also like a machismo within the bad sleep too. Like you said, yeah, I drank a fifth last night and I got 3 hours of sleep, and here I am today. I'm showing up at PT and I'm ready to go. Like, look how awesome and macho I am, while I vomit the whole time on this morning's run. So I can't imagine within the schedule that, because I felt called out appropriately. I think it was in your book where it's like this myth that firefighters have the best schedule.
Well, firstly, let me be very honest. I believed this myth too. And you got to remember, this is a profession where a lot of people in the US do it for free, and the UK, they're paid on call at least. And, which is an appropriate system if you are truly out in a very rural area. The problem is in America, they've abused the volunteer fire service, and now you have suburban neighborhoods in New Jersey that rely on volunteers. So I had someone on recently, and I don't want to misquote, but I think in his career, the call loads had gone up 200% just from 1987 when he started to current day. So that's an immense increase of calls, because we started fusing with EMS, and then even departments that had EMS, they weren't transporting. Then we started transporting, so now we're the ones taking them to the hospital as well. And then you have the 911 abuse that's just got worse and worse and worse. And our god awful healthcare here has got more people relying on us just for any sort of healthcare. What we actually work, we say we work 1 day on, 2 days off, or a lot of people say, I only work 9 days a month. What it actually is a 24-hour shift. So an average civilian workday is 9 hours with a 1 hour lunch. So it's an 8-hour day. I think that's pretty universally accepted, a 40-hour week. And so you've got 3 of those crammed together, 24 hours, of which you're also not sleeping. So then that second day, which we say a day off, it's not, because you work from midday to 8 a.m. So then you go home having worked, full 8 hours on that second day. And then, so you only have that third day, which is actually a day off. So it's not 1 day on, 2 days off. It's actually 3 days on, 1 day off. And so then when you lay that out, it's not 9 days a month. It's actually 30 days a month, pretty much. So now all of a sudden it doesn't make sense. And when I get people to take a step back and go, look, forget all the shapes and schedules. Just look at how many hours you work a week. 56 versus 42. The ones saving lives, 56. The ones working in the bank, 40. It doesn't compute in any way, shape, or form. But we've believed our lives. We've done a terrible, terrible job of educating the public on what we do. Like I always tell people, if it doesn't involve being arrested, we do everything else. And it's not, to beat our chest. It's just the way it is. Your kid goes down a sewage pipe, it's the fire service is going to go get them. A plane crashes into a tree, it's us. A lot of the ocean lifeguards are even a part of the fire service. And that's another incredible profession. So you're asking these people to do basically everything, but with none of the support. And then what will happen, going back to the mandatory overtime, is you get that overtime whore who has been forced to work lots of shifts and then maybe has taken, signed up for some, they'll be like, well, Steve made $180,000 last year. Wow, firefighters make so much. But he's worked umpteen hours and barely seen his family the whole year. So again, it's not an apples to apples comparison. And even if you looked at our salary, if you compare what we make for 56 hours, that's not, you can't. So you have to, divide 40 by 56 and then times by 100. Now you'll actually see what we actually make compared to a civilian. And it's going to be obviously be, almost half. So yeah, no matter how you look at it, you realize that we've just been telling ourselves a lie. And the really important factor, because to me, that if it was just human suffering, we would have changed it by now. But sadly, a lot of people are only going to be moved by saving money if they're in business, cities and counties. So now what you've got to do is you've got to look at the downstream and what happens if you literally work people into the ground. Then you have more injuries, more mistakes, more early deaths, all these things. So now the money we spend on workman's comp, the people don't want to do this job anymore because new people are looking at it going, that looks like it's a bit shit. So now we have a recruitment crisis. So now you're having to pay time and a half on top of someone's salary to cover all these spots. You've got medical retirements that you're having to pay out. You've got lawsuits when we make mistakes. And then obviously our insurance premiums are through the roof because we all get sick so much. So the irony is it's an easy fix, but it takes a courageous leader. The money is there, but it's down by the drain where it's all washed. You've got to front load that and put it back. And people in the fire service say, oh, you got to see the fire service like a business. And I always tell them, yeah, you do. So stop modeling an Indonesian sweatshop and start modeling Google or Virgin or a progressive corporation. And look what they do. You know what they do? They invest in their people. They have gyms in their places. A lot of them now are doing 4 9-hour days and finding that they're being just, if not more productive and more innovative. So no matter which angle you look at it, and this is obviously a very fire department specific conversation, it's just about being proactive, not reactive. And I had Tulsi Gabbard on the show, and this principle applies to so much. It applies to the obesity epidemic, the mental health crisis. We have a system where companies make billions of dollars as long as we stay sick. The pharmaceutical companies, the implants, all these things. And the answer is obviously to create an environment like we touched on with COVID, where we create healthy people again and have less of a reliance on healthcare. But the people that sell drugs don't want that to happen. The people that make uniforms and MREs and weapons are not a big fan of peacetime, So we have to be able to take a step back and go, what is the best for the people, not the few companies that benefit from this? And it's the same even with a city or a county. You want to be financially, fiscally sound, hire more firefighters, give them more time off, and you actually save hand over fist financially as well.
So hiring more firefighters, giving them more time off, and specifically that schedule that you're looking for, or for you that, and by the way, the math has come a long way since college for you. But yeah, so but for you, the 24/72 schedule seems to be the right ratio.
Yeah. So what you're doing is you're putting an extra 24 hours in between each of these shifts. So like I said, that first day is a wash. You've got off at 8 a.m, probably not slept. So that first day, anyone who's in this job will tell you they're a zombie. So now you've given the next day, they woke up and, next to their wife or husband or partner, and they got to have breakfast with their kids, and they went to bed knowing they didn't have to go to work the following morning. Then the next day they're ramping up again. So it's just a 24-hour period. And one of the pushbacks I get is, well, we can't hire firefighters now. How are we supposed to get an extra shift? You can't hire firefighters now because the working conditions are awful. And this young generation has got all this information. Like I said, 20 years ago, I knew nothing about the fire service. Now you Google firefighter, you get, 9/11 and heroes and ladder 49, but you also get cancer, suicide, overdose, divorce in the same Google search. So now people are really able to see, what is this actually like? What's this mandatory overtime? What? I can't go home the next morning? That they're weighing this up in their career choices. And they may be phenomenal firefighters, police officers, whatever it is. But now let's say law enforcement, they wanted to be a cop, and then they're like, wow, this person did the right thing, and then their agency, pulled their legs out from under them. I don't know if I want to work for a tribe that's not going to support me. So these are really important parts of the recruitment conversation. If you actually show, and this has happened to some of the departments that have moved to 24/72, when you show potential candidates, we actually give a shit about you, and we're going to focus on giving an environment for you guys to succeed and give you more time with your family, you start having people lining up around the building wanting to work for you again. So that solution, we can't hire people, you've got to ask yourself, why can't we hire people? And if you were you at 20 years old right now, would you want to work where you work? And if not, fix it.
How do you kind of try to navigate making this very common sense approach that you're bringing actually break beyond the rigid thinking patterns of the old guard?
I think we're fortunate where there are already cracks in that, thank God. One of my friends from one of the places I just worked not too long ago was kind of chirping off with that old school mentality. Well, maybe some people aren't supposed to be firefighters. And it was a response to a firefighter suicide. Very, very cold and disconnected. But there's two ways of looking at it. Firstly, it's performance. Again, ask yourself, all right, why doesn't your favorite NHL player stay awake every third day? Because we know it makes you worse. So if you're the chest beating alpha, it never did me any harm, you're fighting against change and you're hanging on to being a shittier firefighter. So there's that point. For me, the massive motivator, literally the origin story of the Behind the Shield podcast, is 6 funerals. That's why I'm not a firefighter, as far as I'm not paid to be a firefighter anymore. And I still am fighting this fight because there's nothing worse than watching a broken-hearted family being handed a folded flag and a fire helmet. So the chest beating, oh, I was okay for me. What a selfish attitude. Firstly, you're probably hurting, which is why you're saying that in the first place. You just don't have the courage to actually come out and be vulnerable. But secondly, let's say hypothetically that you're still in amazing health. You're a medical anomaly. You're Kim Jong-il. You don't have a butthole and your resting heart rate is 20. Okay. Then why are you not advocating for everyone else? Why? Because you're this whole I got mine thing. It's like the pushback against having a universal healthcare in this country. Well, why would I want to help someone else? Well, I'm pretty sure the place that you go to worship, the dude that you read about wouldn't have been like, I got mine, fuck everyone else. So there's that shift too. Like think about, what you're taught, that compassion. But the biggest thing is we're not okay. Like literally, no, we just lost an Ohio firefighter to suicide, literally the town next to where my wife grew up. And then where I live, we've had a suicide and overdose in the last, within, I think it was 6 weeks of each other, where I used to work. And then where I live, just over a year ago, we had 2 firefighters, each of which were either side of 30 years old, kill themselves, within 12 weeks of each other. So you're telling me there isn't a problem? So this is the thing. You want to bury your head in the sand or up your own ass and ignore this or come out with that ridiculous, it was fine for me. You're ignoring all science when it comes to performance. You're ignoring everything that your favorite athletes go through. You're pushing against progress. And then that whole, rub some dirt in it, be a real man. Listen to the Behind the Shield podcast where I've got members of the SAS and SEAL Team 6 and, all these other alpha professions that are in tears because they actually have the courage to be vulnerable. They're not saying, I did it, so, everyone else should. So to me, those are the words of the coward, to be completely blunt. Because if you're not advocating for what you call your brothers and sisters, then you're a coward. It's that simple.